Population density in the Iberian Peninsula is, to say the least, strange, especially when you compare it to the rest of Europe, which in general has a wide distribution of population across its territory. But for Portugal and Spain, not so much. Spain is almost an absurd case of most of the country being empty with some super concentrated population areas. In Portugal, whose continental borders form almost a perfect rectangle, most of the interior is deserted, and most of the people have concentrated on the coast in the western side of the country. This is what this video is about. We can see it very clearly here in this population density map. It's almost like a perfect gradient. In addition, this seems to be a tendency over the past 20 years. These two maps show us the population change by municipality, first between 2001 and 2011, and then between 2011 and 2020. In both, the interior municipalities are losing tremendous percentages of their population, always in the dark red. Furthermore, the concentration doesn't seem to be on the entirety of the coast. The southwest coast of Alentejo is pretty sparsely populated, and the southern one of Algarve as well. It's in this center west and northwest coast that everybody is. On the southern edge of this high density area is the capital city of Lisbon and its metropolitan and suburban area. In the northern edge is the second largest city of the country, Porto, and its respective metropolitan and suburban areas. In between, there are more medium-sized cities and suburbs which keep growing more and more, sometimes into each other, and effectively beginning to form somewhat of a megalopolis like we see in other countries like the US or most popularly Japan. So why does this happen, and is there effectively a new megalopolis being created here? First, what's a megalopolis? The origin of the word is from the Greek, meaning essentially great city. It's commonly been used to describe a very large, heavily populated city or urban complex. Often it happens when two or more cities grow to the point that they become connected. There's a good amount of them across the world. China alone has like 12. Worldwide, there's an additional 50 to 60 regions that can be described as such. I believe it first became a popular term with Japan's Taiyo Belt, a region with over 80 million people that connects over 18 cities in a gigantic urban area. This is still one of the biggest megalopolis in the world, but there are some other equal or even bigger ones, like the Blue Banana in Europe, 32 cities with over 120 million people across Central Europe, although these cities aren't really connected, while Japan's is, I think, so take from that what you will. Or the Northeast Corridor in the US, joining 15 cities and over 50 million people, Mega Manila in the Philippines with 40 million, or the Nile Delta, which also connects over 50 million people. Although, like I just said, arguably these are less of a perfect example of a megalopolis, given that there are non-urban areas between them, while Japan's is more of a fully connected megacity, but still, if you want, I can do a full video about the world's different megalopolis. One of these megalopolis is called the Atlantic Axis. It incorporates precisely the region of Portugal from Lisbon and Setúbal in the south to Porto and Braga in the north. In addition, it adds onto it the cities of Galicia in Spain, Vigo, Orense, Pontevedra, Santiago, and Coruña. In this video, we're going to be focusing on Portugal's area only because the reasons for the population concentration in Galicia are slightly different. Portugal's portion of the Atlantic Axis megalopolis include the following cities: Setúbal, Lisbon, Santarém, Leiria, Coimbra, Viseu, Aveiro, Porto, Braga, and Viana do Castelo. It's important to note that the south and north poles of this region are significantly denser and more populated than the space in between. This exaggerated relief map shows us that, with huge peaks around Lisbon, some big ones in Porto, and lower ones in between connecting the two. The gap between Porto and Galicia also, I think, justifies their separation. Across the country, the population density is far lower, save some small exceptions of medium-sized cities like Guarda, Castelo Branco, or Bragança, maybe Faro too, which have so far survived the max exodus that has happened from Portugal's interior to its coast. So why did this exodus happen? But let's take a minute to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can access a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. Starting therapy can be hard, but with BetterHelp, it becomes a little easier. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy, and that way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. But you can still switch them at any time with no additional charge. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message them at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. You can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/generalknowledge, and I've also linked them below in the video description. Now back to the video. A few years ago, now former Portuguese Prime Minister António Costa held several meetings with his Spanish counterpart Pedro Sánchez across border towns in both Spain and Portugal, attempting to promote cross-border cooperation and together planned to boost the region's development, claiming it was unacceptable that the Iberian border was one of the few in Europe that wasn't highly populated or developed. But Portugal's problem with its interior has been around for a long time, with the population total and density being much lower. Actually, some estimates point to almost 70% of the country being fully uninhabited, with the little amount of people that do live there being concentrated in a few small to medium-sized towns. The Lisbon district alone hosts about a fifth of the country's total population. 17% more live in Porto, and the 5 biggest districts, which also include Setúbal, Braga, and Aveiro, reach almost 50% of the entire 10 million population nationwide. On the opposite side of the spectrum, in the interior, there's actual ghost villages in some places where everyone has left. So why? An important part of it is topography, which can be summarized to the interior is hilly and mountainous, the coast has plains. This makes it so that it's much easier to build infrastructure and develop the coastal regions. Essentially, it's harder to build on mountains, and it's harder to cross mountains with roads and railroads. The highway system map shows us this in part, as does the railway one. In both of them, there's maybe 4 to 5 ways into the interior, straight lines into the medium-sized cities, and no real network that allows for a full reach of the entire territory. Sure, there are local roads and smaller railway circuits, but they're not fast or common, and this hinders the development process. These regions also have worse climate, with colder winters, discouraging settlement when a better alternative is available. When we overlay a terrain map over a population map, there are some matches that allow us to understand this. The northeast is particularly low population, which coincides with the most mountainous region, but Alentejo and the central southern interior have plains too, yet they remain unpopulated, so this can't be the only reason. Alentejo's issue is different. There's no mountains, but there are a good amount of forests, vegetable farms, fruit orchards, and cattle farming, with a lot of the land being taken over by this. There's not as much room for people to live in. In addition, with machinery, these are industries that don't require that much manpower, and even if they do, that work is often underpaid. This leads to people not wanting to settle there. It's a little bit of a vicious cycle. People move out, and so there's no infrastructure like good schools, hospitals, and then people don't move there because of the absence of that infrastructure. Furthermore, Alentejo is a pre-dry region in some places. With global warming, it's becoming more and more like a desert, with temperatures reaching upwards of 45 degrees in the hottest summers. This also drives people away. Water scarcity in Alentejo and Algarve due to the droughts also contribute to the absence of a large-scale population that just doesn't want to deal with those issues every year. So now that we've covered the natural reasons that push people away from both the northern and southern interior, let's get into the social, economic, and mostly political reasons. It seems to have started partially in the time of European discoveries and colonial empires. Portugal knew it couldn't expand its interior further into Spain, as Spain was always militarily superior. They turned to the oceans and set off discovering what was to Europeans a new world. This sea-focused economy and the establishment of a large Portuguese colonial and commercial empire abroad began leading people to the coastal regions where such opportunities opportunities could be found. Much later in the 20th century, Portugal lived under a dictatorial regime which pursued policies that focused on the coastal regions more than they did on the interior. Although they did have some small policies to try and fix the issue, very unsuccessfully, but this also proves that it was already an existing issue back then. Not to mention the fact that they were economically miserable, fault of a corrupt corporativist regime and an obsession with fiscal surplus regardless of the cost. If people in the capital city of Lisbon walked around barefoot due to poverty, you can imagine the state of even poorer interior regions at this time. Additional factors had to do with a lack of investment in education, causing a tremendously high illiteracy rate that stopped development in many areas. Furthermore, this economic disaster, paired with dictatorial practices, lack of freedom, persecution, and most of all the colonial war, led a lot of people to emigrate or simply run away from the country, moving to France, Switzerland, or Luxembourg, which explains the high percentage of Portuguese people there today, and this emptied the interior regions even more. During summer periods, now, a lot of these interior regions have an increase in population because so many of the immigrants come back for their holidays, and then they're emptied again. With the arrival of democracy and European integration, tremendous development finally arrived to Portugal, but most of it was concentrated in Lisbon and Porto and other coastal regions. Birth rates became lower and the average age became older. The country's economy partially shifted from agriculture to industry and above all the service sector, which mostly concentrates its activities in bigger cities already on the coast. This made a lot of young people leave their interior homes and move there in search of higher paying jobs and better lives. In addition, Portugal now has an opposite situation of hosting a lot of immigrant communities that arrive mostly from countries of their former colonial empire, such as Brazil and other African nations. These immigrants mostly stay in the big cities on the coast. Some governments have created programs to try and incentivize moving into the interior with some tax benefits, as well as an expansion and improvement of the infrastructures there, building and improving more roads and railways, but none have been enough to counter this historical problem. With the focused development of Lisbon and Porto, the suburbs of those cities have begun growing more and more. As housing and living cost increases, people are forced to move more into those suburbs and even into neighboring cities, which then grow in turn, repeating the process to an extent that these two major cities are now almost connected in urbanization. Don't get me wrong, there's not a constant megacity from Lisbon to Porto, but the urbanization of this coastal territory is almost constant, from one tip of the Megalopolis to the other, and things don't seem to be changing, so maybe the mega city idea isn't as far away as one could think. So, that is why Portugal's population density is so unbalanced, why so much of its population is concentrated on the coast to the point where it has reached a megalopolis criteria, and why the interior is essentially deserted. Part of it has to do with the territory's natural features, but as we saw, there's definitely a social and political element to it. What do you think? Do you agree with the causes I mentioned here? Do you think a real megacity will eventually be created in the megalopolis? And is this a good or a bad thing? What would you do to attract more people to Portugal's interior? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching this video, subscribe to catch the future ones, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.